Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Omnia Report. I'm Ricky Harris here with Omnia Fishing, and today I'm really excited to have a conversation with Caleb Wistad from Wisconsin. We're going to be talking a little bit about some different species. We've kind of focused on bass for the most part with this series, but I'm really excited to kind of break down some of these lakes in Wisconsin and talk about just the diverse fisheries that you guys have. But before we get started, Caleb, I just wanted to give you a second, kind of introduce yourself and let the audience know what you've got going on and kind of what makes you, an authority on some of these things here in Wisconsin.
Sure. Yeah. I've been fishing northern Wisconsin, Great Lakes, and the Mississippi River, and all the inland lakes within 100 or 200 miles of my house since I was 2 years old. So I'm really familiar with Wisconsin in general, and been sort of building a YouTube channel here for about 5 years, and just recently went full time with that. So I'm full time creating content for that channel now, and it's all fishing content, primarily educational, a lot of regional stuff, but a lot of stuff that will apply just about anywhere in the Midwest as well. Minnesota, Michigan, Canada, it's that kind of multi-species content that you're talking about. And I fish for everything from catfish to steelhead to walleyes to bluegills. I mean, and everything in between. So you name it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to this, and we'll kind of get started here. So just let everyone know this is kind of your home area here. We're looking at really, I consider it northwestern Wisconsin. Uh,
Yep.
looking at all these lakes here, and one of the cool things to really call out here first is any of the audience will notice there's a lot of purple lake pins here as well as orange, and what that signifies is we actually have the uh, Department of Natural Resources survey data for not only Minnesota but Wisconsin now as well. So you'll see some of these here along the line, even into Minnesota. We'll have these pins too. And one of the really cool things I wanted just to show everyone. So, you're looking at kind of a vast area like this, and, especially this part of the country, like you've got to mention, there's such a wealth of different species of fish from walleye to pike to perch to, bass, largemouth and smallmouth both. But excuse me, really, when you want to break it down here more specifically, you can go to we'll just say walleye, for instance, and you can actually see how these lake pins have changed here. So now we're just looking at lakes that have lunker potential for walleye. And what that means when we say lunker potential is that the Department of Natural Resources, the wildlife, the Fish and Game Department, whatever, it's called there in their respective states, is we have the electrofishing and net fishing survey data. And what we consider lunker potential is whatever the state classifies as a trophy size fish. So, with smallmouth, it may be 20 inches. I'm not exactly sure what the threshold is here on the walleye and pike. But that's what that signifies with those purple pins. So if you're wanting to walleye fish and you want to, kind of try to maximize your chances best you can, look for some of these purple lake pins that will show up there. As we zoom a little bit closer, you can see a couple right here. And you can do the same thing with the pike too. Breaking it down, and you can see some of these pins have already changed here as well. So, but what I want to do just starting out is just to look at all these species of reports. So, kind of starting here from around where you're at, Caleb. I just want to look through here, just kind of your thoughts on what's being, reported for some of these different things. And if there's when you're going out this time of year, Caleb, and it's this kind of the dog days of summer that we're getting into now. Is there a particular species that you like to target this time of year? Or, is there one that you feel like is more active or is biting better? Just looking down through some of these reports, we've got a different amount of reports from different species. As you can see here, let me go back up to the top and I'll select some of these other species. We've got largemouth reports, we've got smallmouth reports,
Yep.
uh, crappie, pretty much everything. So kind of what's your thought process on that, Caleb? And is it, does it have to do with the day-to-day conditions, or is there just, one species you feel like is biting the best this time of year?
Well, it really comes down to what you want to do in a day, and what you want to fish for, how you want to target them. You know, Late summer can be good for just about any species. However, if you're limited on electronics and you like fishing shallow, definitely it limits what you can target, because a lot of fish do move deeper in the summertime. So, if you like to walleye fish and you don't have a lot of experience with electronics and you don't like fishing deep, then you may want to fish for something else, because most of the walleyes are deep right now. Um, Now, if you want to go chuck, frogs for bass up shallow, it's a great time to do that. Fish some slop. Um, a lot of times the crappies and stuff will be on the weed lines all summer. And in some lakes, there'll be a walleyes around on weed lines as well. Um, and late summer is a great time if you do have electronics and you're familiar with them to go find walleyes on offshore structure on those deeper humps and reefs. And that's a good time. Completely different fishing than slop fishing for bass, but they're both happening at the same time. And then, there's just so much in between too. You've got a lot of different panfish options spread out from, suspended in deep water towards late summer to weed bites happening still. So there's tons of opportunities in late summer. And the nice thing about late summer is most fish are feeding pretty heavily and they're pretty active. So a lot of times they're fairly easy to catch in the late summer period. So um but yeah, I guess it just depends on what you want to do that day. Some days I'll load my boat with my finesse spinning tackle and go chase walleyes in open water and just target fish. And then other days I'm loading up my heavy bass tackle and flipping and throwing frogs up in 2 feet of water. So just depends on what you want to do.
Yeah, that's that's really cool, how much diversity there is up there. And looking at some of these lakes, I was just kind of looking over at the water temperature and doesn't really seem like, that's kind of the thing that, it's easy to keep in mind is, up in the north, especially, looking at Wisconsin or Minnesota or, any of these northern places, Michigan too, for that matter. The water temperatures really don't get, super, super hot in the summertime. What would you, say is, some of the hottest temperatures you see? I'm looking at some of these right here, and it's ranging anywhere from the upper 60s to low 70s for the most part. Where I'm at, if you're down south in Kentucky, we're seeing water temperatures in the low 80s, in places like
Mhm.
that. Is typically ever getting that hot? And I guess it's kind of a two-part question here too. Is a lot of these natural lakes and things, to the best of my knowledge, there's not a ton of deep water. And I consider more than 60, 70 feet in a lot of cases. So, is the water temperature really ever getting too hot in your opinion up there to target really any of these species that you want to? And how deep is the deepest that you feel like some of these fish get? Which I know some of these lakes, they don't have a tremendous amount of depth to go to. Is that kind of
Mhm.
where some of the vegetation and things like that come into play? Or um,
Yeah, there is a huge variety of lakes up here. I mean, we have some lakes that are pushing over 120 feet deep that have
yeah.
cold water fish like ciscos and whitefish in them. And we've got, lakes that have fish that bottom out at like 12 feet, that basically are completely different fisheries. So those smaller, shallower basins fisheries with lots of weeds in them are the ones that you have to watch the water temps a little bit more, and they do get into the 80s at times. If we get a long stretch with no wind and hot weather, they will get that warm, but very temporarily typically. Even the big lakes can get pretty warm on the surface in the summertime if you don't have a lot of wind stirring them up. But if you get a big wind, it doesn't really matter how hot the temps are out. It'll stir them up enough that they're not going to get super hot. But the one fish that we really have to watch up here when it comes to too hot of water is muskies. Because what happens is muskies they'll suspend in open water or deeper water, and they'll be 20, 30 feet down, and that water's a lot cooler than the surface water. And when you fight a big fish up into that warm water, like you say, you get above 78-degree surface temps, and you fight them in that warm water and keep them out of the water. That movement from the cold water into the warm water can be really detrimental to those fish, and typically muskies are going to be released. And so a lot of muskie guys recommend not fishing muskies once that temp gets up pushing towards 80 on the surface. Just wait a few days, let the wind stir things up, and then you can get back at it. But if the wind's blowing, the other thing you have to take into consideration is the direction of the wind, because on those deep lakes, what'll happen is the wind will push the warm water to one end of the lake, and there'll be a cold water upwelling on the other side of the lake. So if you fish the upwind side, sometimes there's a 10-degree difference between that side and downwind side of the lake, which is using Omnia. You can see the lake, the temps, on a lot of these lakes, you can see the temperature distribution, but in real time, you also want to pull up the wind maps because that'll tell you which way that warm water is getting pushed on that lake. So if you pull up the wind layer, you can see where that warm water is going to end up versus where that cold water is going to pop up on the upwind side.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
the
just
same
to show
goes for spring.
right here. I've got that wind layer pulled up right now, and yeah, it looks like we've kind of got a, it's blowing right up into the northern part of, we're just looking at some of the lakes here just outside of Spooner, but you can actually look at the, we have it up to a 7-day forecast as well too, so you can actually play this
Mhm.
and see over time how that wind's going to blow and change not just the speed of it, but the direction as well. So it's a great tool for planning. If you're looking for kind of that scenario, you can go and look at the, Friday, Saturday, Sunday if you're going out this weekend. And, it may be the west end of the lake that's experiencing that, today on Tuesday, but then, looking at the weekend, it may be pushing that more eastern or different things. That's a really good point to call out is that wind direction is a super valuable tool there, even in the summertime, I think especially being able to see
Yeah.
that because just a little bit cooler water can, make a big difference. And just looking here on this particular lake, the Chippewa flowage, for instance, some of those temperatures we're looking at there were upper or lower 70s here on this end and
Mhm.
you know, higher upper 60s just on the other end, which, isn't a huge lake by any means, but still just being able to see that variance there, I can imagine, that can really make a huge difference.
It sure can. Yeah, fish can really tell. Uh, I mean, 1 degree to a fish is like 10 degrees for us. So it definitely makes a big difference. And in the spring, everything reverses and you want to find the warm water. So you go to the downwind side of the lake and fish the windy side. And the nice thing about Omnia is, you can kind of envision, you can look on the weather channel and see which direction the wind is going to be blowing. But to put that on a map and actually know, like, I want to fish that one bay, is the wind going to be blowing into it? It's hard for your mind to kind of figure out sometimes how that wind is actually going to go blow into that bay. But when you can see it on the map like that, it's really, really helpful. And it just kind of helps it click where those fish are going to be at.
Yeah, just looking at Round Lake here for example, the further that you zoom in, you can actually get really specific and see, exactly what angle these pins are hitting into
Yep.
that bank. So that can really give you, we use it down here in the south a lot to see where, banks are going to be wind blown, places you could potentially throw top waters and things like that in the early morning, late in the afternoon. And just, from even a navigational standpoint too, sometimes, a lot of these bigger lakes, especially some of the Great Lakes in particular, that wind direction and speed can make the difference in whether or not you should even be out there on the water, period, that day. So, it's a
Yeah,
really,
I
really,
mean, we fish Lake Superior all the time, and I was just checking for Thursday. I was using Omnia last night to check the wind out there on Lake Superior because that's one place that you can't go on certain days if the wind is blowing from the wrong direction, and you really got to watch it out there. So it's a very handy tool for that as well because kind of sets you up for which side of the lake you're going to put in on and what port you can go out of and stuff like that. You can see it real obviously. And the crazy thing about the Great Lakes is on one shoreline the wind can be blowing north, on the other shoreline it can be blowing south. And the weather forecast is hard to predict sometimes, but when you can see it in real time on the map, it's super helpful.
yeah, that's really something cool to call out here. You can see it, this particular section of the lake, the wind's blowing, um, you know, really kind of north, western here. But then you get over here into going towards Duluth. It's actually coming, almost to the southwest,
Yep.
direction there. So it's really interesting to call out too. And especially on those big bodies of water like that, that this little difference right here could make the difference in whether or not you can even fish that day, so that's
Absolutely.
really, really cool. So you mentioned Superior, and that's something I really want to talk about too, Caleb. Is there are there certain conditions that you look for that say, man, I'm going to go up to Superior instead of going to some of these smaller lakes? It's I talk so much to the guys in Minnesota and Wisconsin, both of you. You guys have so many lakes. It
Mhm.
seems like it'd be really difficult for me to decide which one I wanted to go to that weekend. But what's the ideal scenario for you to be able to go up to Superior? And is there certain species that you really like to target in Superior? Or is it just when the conditions are right, you can go up there and catch anything that you want to?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is so many options up here. That is the sometimes the hardest decision you make all day is where you're going because there's so many options. But when it comes to Lake Superior, basically if I have a full day and I know I got all day to fish and the wind isn't too bad, And the wind is really the huge key there because number one, you have to have no very little wind the day you go. If you have a small boat like I do, 18-foot boat. Number two, it can't have been windy out of the wrong direction the day before either, because those swells are going to keep moving for about 24 hours. So if you had a big east wind the day before, those swells are still going to be really rough out there, even if the wind is dead calm the next day. So you kind of have to watch those two things. And if everything lines up and I have a full day to fish, I basically go to Lake Superior because those stars don't align that often. And when I can go, I go. And my favorite thing to do there is probably vertical jig for lake trout. But there's certain places you have to be able to get to do that. And again, the weather has to be perfect. You have to have the right window of time. And that's when I go do that. But there's more options if you just want to troll for multi-species. Depending on the wind, you can kind of get on the north side of the lake, the south side of the lake, or in the bay or the islands to kind of block the wind. So if you want to just troll, it's a little bit easier to get out there and do that. But that's basically it. When I have time and the weather lines up, I just forget everything else and run up there because it's
Yeah,
such a special place to fish.
that's really cool. Yeah, it's funny you're talking about trolling and vertical jigging. Those are, two of the three top techniques that recommended from the real fishing reports that we, get generated. So the other
Hmm.
technique he calls out is spoons. Is that something
Hmm.
that you're throwing quite a bit there? And for a guy like myself, spoons are kind of subjective depending on what part of the country you go to. Along the Tennessee River and things, it's flutter spoons or really big spoons like that. But
Hmm.
if they're you throwing casting spoons a lot, jigging spoons, it's what kind of spoon specifically is it? You
Well,
guys are using.
it's all three. I mean, and when it comes to trout and salmon, they love spoons. So it doesn't matter if it's a jigging spoon, a trolling spoon, a casting spoon. I've caught trout and salmon on all three of those presentations in Lake Superior. Typically, if I'm bank fishing staging fish that are running up the rivers or fishing in the tributaries, I'm usually throwing a casting spoon. Obviously, trolling will troll them on just about anything. You can troll them on a flat line with lead core. You can troll them on a downrigger. You can troll them on a dipsy diver. Trolling spoons are super versatile. And then jigging spoons, we use them ice fishing as well as in open water when we want to target fish, deep in a specific area where we can get over the top of them. And spoon is a great option because its fish is really heavy. And there's so much current in Lake Superior that something real heavy and that fish is heavy and doesn't have a big wide footprint that's going to get blown out of your sonar by that current is really important. So jigging spoons work pretty well in a lot of applications there when you're fishing those deeper fish.
Yeah, and looking here at some of the fishing reports too for Lake Superior, it's like you said, you just mentioned the striking sexy spoon, which is more, traditional flutter spoon type bait. But then you've got the VMC rattle spoon too, which is, kind of that more chicken spoon shape, which it's, kind of special with the rattle and everything. But
Hmm.
that's it's super, super interesting to me that a spoon seems like one of the most versatile lures by far for any species of fish.
Yep. Yeah, I don't use spoons a ton inland unless I'm fishing stream trout, smaller streams for trout. But in the Great Lakes, we use them all the time.
You go back down here towards um, Spooner in this area, some of these smaller lakes, you kind of look at some of the reports and, I'm amazed at just the difference of, techniques and things that are, guys are catching fish on, which, like we talked about earlier with just the water temperatures and things, the way that they are. I feel like most species for the most part are, fairly active, that time of year. So it's, kind of the perfect storm for, especially an angler that loves to fish for multi-species. It's really, really super cool to see. Is there,
Hmm.
as far as any of these techniques, what would you say your favorite technique is to do this time of year, regardless of species? Is there a way that you really, really love catching them? Because it seems like there's, everything that you could want to possibly do, you could find a lake within, a 50-mile radius here to go do that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for a multi-species technique for me, just about nothing beats a jig head and a paddle tail swim bait. I mean, if you want to catch largemouth, smallmouth, pike, walleyes, even big crappies, big perch, throw a 2.5 inch crushed city mayor on a 3/8 ounce jig head, or something like that in the summertime, that you can get down towards the bottom edge of those deeper weed lines, and just slow crank that thing, slow roll it. Sometimes I'll even go up to like a 1/2 ounce jig on and a 3 inch paddle tail, let it hit bottom, and just to start cranking it real slow and letting it swim across, just above the bottom, maybe 2, 3 feet off the bottom. And once in a while, let it crash back into the bottom, start your retrieve again. I mean, that will literally catch every single fish in the lake, from muskies to pike to crappies to perch to, I mean, you name it. It's really fun to fish that way. And when fish hit those baits, they absolutely crush them. I mean, there's no tap tap or nibble nibble. It's like wham. They usually hit it to kill it. So, super, super effective anywhere for anything, basically, honestly. And I use that presentation on lighter jigs early in the spring, and then on heavier jigs as the summer progresses. And you can also vertical jig a swim bait, over some of those deeper reefs as well, for those walleyes and stuff. Get them to chase it up, and you can watch them on your forward facing if you have forward facing. And it's a really effective bait for target fishing like that, and sharpshooting as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned forward-facing sonar, and I want to get your perspective on that. From kind of the multi-species, angling mindset. Is that, do you see that becoming something that is, you're utilizing for every species of fish that you're targeting, from walleye to pike to muskie, or, do you find that it kind of has its, strengths and its, not necessarily weaknesses, but just scenarios where you really don't utilize it. I know there's a tremendous amount of grass up there. I know it can be difficult that, once fish actually get up into that grass and things, it's really hard to, see them with that forward facing sonar. But, do you think that that's changed, the way that you fish for some of these other species outside of, we talk about it so much with bass, and, I really want to
Yep.
talk about it, some of these other species too. Are you seeing the same thing in those kind of areas of, guys that are getting that forward facing sonar, kind of, ahead of the curve, or catching a lot more than some of the other guys, or, kind of what are you seeing there on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I've been using it for 2 years in open water now, and this year I really got good with it, and really started to understand a lot more about fish behavior from it. And it's one of those things that it's unbelievable once you learn how to use it as a tool for multi-species. I mean, walleyes are extremely susceptible to forward-facing sonar, because they oftentimes stack up outside of cover and near cover, but they don't love to be in the thick of the cover a lot of times. So they're really easy to see, typically on forward-facing sonar. And they kind of, once you learn the patterns that they school in and kind of the size of the fish, I can almost always tell what's a walleye and what's a bass just from what I'm looking at on my forward-facing sonar. So if you're specifically targeting walleyes, it's indispensable, because you can actually put a bait right on top of them. And oftentimes they get so finicky in the summertime that if your bait's not literally on their head, they will not bite. And even sometimes then they can be tough. So, just to pinpoint fit those walleyes and get a bait on top of them and know it's on top of them, it's indispensable. And the same for crappies and panfish that school. I mean, you can see them so easily with forward-facing sonar. Um, and muskies and pike, it's amazing too. There's a lot of guys that are anti forward-facing sonar for muskies, especially fishing them in open water, because it's so easy, and those fish are so susceptible to being caught multiple times and getting beat up. So, they're also a little easier to kill accidentally when you catch them from deep water. And there's a lot of guys that's all they're doing now is literally going out and scoping muskies in deep water and dropping baits right on their head. And there's a lot of guys that won't do it. They refuse to do it, and they think no one else should do it. And then there's other guys who have no problem with it. So there's quite a debate on that when it comes to muskies, because it does make them so much more targetable than they were before it came along. Now guys are going out and catching 6, 7, 8 fish in a day, where, it was the fish of 10,000 casts, and you'd be lucky if you caught one in a day. But now they're so easy to spot that, it's almost too much.
Yeah, yeah, I completely understand that. That's, growing up, that's what I always heard was the fish of, 10,000 casts. And I think I probably made 100,000 before I ever even hooked up with a little
Mhm.
husky. So I know that, Abundance is a huge thing, and I wanted just to call out. I'm just looking at Shell Lake here. I don't know if you
Hmm.
click on that. This is one that I just selected Muskie, and it has locker potential here. So I wanted to break it down even further and look at some of the data, and they have what the CPUE is, catch per unit effort, which we have a little right up here about it, just talking about it. But looking over the years, this is a timeline here of 2014 to, it looks like kind of the peak here, at least on Shell Lake, was maybe 2012, 2013. And then it looks like
Yep.
the numbers have kind of, just declined over time.
Yep.
Do you feel like you're
And I've
seeing,
seen that there.
Wisconsin is there? I know that, there's really limited abundance of muskie, but, is that, do you feel like that's something that's a huge concern? Is it just, more of a frustration from an angling standpoint, or is it, do you feel like anglers are not seeing as many muskie up there now? Or, it's such a rare fish. I feel like it's really kind of hard to gauge the population really in some of these lakes, especially when you have, as many lakes that you do that can inhabit these muskie. From that standpoint, is there, I don't know a ton about, just kind of the musky fishing. I know there's a few tournaments and things like that, but, outside of that, are guys, catching a lot of musket eaters? It pretty much just purely kind of a game fish type thing where there is such limited, you know, quantities of those in each individual lake. Kind of what does that look like from, he's explained it to someone that's really not familiar with,
Hmm.
kind of the musky fishing up north.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the muskie fishing here and in Minnesota in general is 100, almost 100% catch and release. The size limits on muskies in most lakes are, you know, over 45 inches. Some are over 50 inches. So to keep a muskie, there's still a few guys that may keep one to mount, a skin mount for a trophy mount, but a lot of guys are just doing replicas now anyway. So the actual fishing pressure on muskies that are being kept is almost zero. There's very, very little. In fact, probably the native spearing kills more big muskies than people actually keeping them and eating. There is a spearing season for muskies up here in northern Wisconsin that the tribes engage in, but they kill a few and eat them. But other than that, sport fisheries very rarely intentionally kill muskies. However, there is a good amount of unintentional muskie that basically just couldn't take being caught, or they bled out, or they were fought too long, or fought out of deep water. So there's definitely some fish that just die from being caught. That's definitely part of the issue up here is fishing those deep fish. Is we're concerned that there's more fish that are not making it, especially after the release, that are dying down there deep where the damage has been done, but we don't necessarily see it. So it's basically delayed mortality. Um, so that's all being studied right now, and it's kind of hard to say if that's been a factor, but I think muskie numbers in general have dropped in a lot of lakes from what I have seen in the past, but there's so many factors involved too. And we do have a good stocking program here. My best friend actually works for the fisheries department and does a lot of the netting and egg take and the raising of the fish and stocking, and that's going really well. So, the fish are being put back into the lakes, but it does take a long time to grow a 50-inch muskie too. So it's one of those fish that we were really trying to be careful with and protect because they are so vulnerable. Even though the people aren't keeping them to eat necessarily, they're still vulnerable to that just fishing pressure in general.
Yeah. Yeah, and something we've noticed, down here in the South, there's been a really big trend the last few years in tournaments in the summertime, whether they're day tournaments or night tournaments, going to a 3 fish limit as opposed to five, and
Hmm.
trying to counteract, some of these things that we know, currently have an effect on these fish's health and population. But we're looking here. I just wanted to go down. I noticed another lake pin that had. We were looking at Shell Lake earlier. You may have to help me with the pronunciation on this one. Wapagasset, is that correct?
Wapagassa, yep. Hmm.
Yes. So I was looking here at the catch per unit effort. It's actually increased
Hmm.
pretty good since 2014. So this is really cool. If you're living kind of right here in this area, this is the perfect tool if you're a muskie angler to say, well, looking up here at Shell Lake, it's the population seems to be on the decline the last few years, whereas Wapagasset down here is actually up on the increase. Looking at the average length, it's showing 39.1 inches here. Then you go up here and it's showing 40.8 3. So it seems like there's still, a lot of big size muskie in there, and the population being better too. So, just from my perspective, that's definitely the one that I would be going to target, muskie if I were going out this weekend.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great tool. And, for fish like walleyes and crappies, those two fish especially, like, not every lake has big ones in it. There's so many lakes that they just don't put out big fish. They put out numbers. If you want to go get a meal of walleyes, go to one of those lakes that has high numbers and is not necessarily a trophy lake. There's very few that have numbers and size of walleyes. They are out there, but they're definitely the exception. It's usually kind of one or the other. If you want to target trophy walleyes, you need to go to a lake that has those size fish in it. Not just walleyes, but you need to know that there has been fish proven to be in that lake of that, in that size category you're looking for, which is typically over 28 up here, I would say, is a trophy walleye. So don't bother fishing lakes if you want to catch a trophy that haven't shown that there's no proof, that there is actually fish that size in it. So this is a great tool because for a fact at one point, you can also see at what point they caught a fish in that trophy range. So you know that they do exist in that fishery. I mean, that's a good starting point to go from, is just knowing that they exist in that lake of that size.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, just to clarify there one too, anytime that you see one of these purple pins on the lakes, that when we say it has lunker potential, that means at least one fish over the trophy threshold. And if you break it down here, look, we've got bass and largemouth. So any bass or largemouth, largemouth or smallmouth, I'm sorry, over 20 inches, then that will get lunker potential. With walleye, it's 29 inches. On a muskie, it's 40. So, there's any of these pins, there is at least, at least one. But I thought it was so interesting. We were just talking about abundance and things. And, this grindstone lake here in particular has, it says, an above average abundance of walleye. And you look at the catch per unit effort, and it's over 200. We were looking at some of the muskie, and it was, very limited. Even here, looking at northern pike, which is, I'd say a little bit more abundant fish than a muskie, would you say? But, still much less abundant than most others. You
Hmm.
see the catch per unit effort here on Grindstone Lake. There was, at its peak, they had one catch per unit effort. So, a huge difference there in the, abundance. But, looking at the walleye, there is an above average abundance, according to the Department of Natural Resources, says the average length is, 15 inches. So, I know that's not a trophy by any means, but, if you have a lake that has, an abundance of that, 14 to 16, 17-inch walleye, that can be a tremendous amount of fun going out and just catching. And, for, catching and keeping, from your perspective, what's the ideal size range on like a walleye? I know muskie and pike aren't necessarily ones that, guys are keeping to take home, but, as far as, walleye and things like that go, what's your ideal size
Hmm.
there?
Well, there are quite a few people that target pike for meal. I mean, pike are abundant up here. They're totally different fish than muskies. I mean, their abundance is oftentimes actually overpopulation in a lot of these lakes. So a lot of people do eat pike, and they're delicious. I think they're better than walleyes personally if you learn to take the Y bones out. But um,
Really?
I would say a typical keeper size walleye would be something from 15 to 20 inches in those upper teens. That's kind of the target for most people. You get much above 20 inches and they start to get a little bit bigger than you want to keep. I never keep any over about 21. That's about my max on walleyes. Pike, 28 to 32 maybe at the biggest. Even a 26 fat pike has quite a bit of meat on it. And then the panfish are super popular up here to keep. And if you're catching, 11, 12-inch plus perch, 8-inch plus bluegills, and, I'd say 11-inch plus crappies, those are all nice eater size fish. And a trophy crappie is probably 14 and a half, 15 inches here. A trophy bluegill is probably a 10-inch or plus. And a trophy perch might be 13 plus, and anything over those sizes I typically release to. Um, so that's kind of the ranges for most of the fish that we eat up here, I guess. I like to say muskies are kind of off the table. And actually, we do have a lot of lakes up here, especially in two counties, my county and the county to the west of me here, that are overpopulated with largemouth and they're stunted. So there's literally thousands of them and they don't get much above 16 inches. And those lakes, they're encouraging people to keep the bass and they've removed the size limit. So we keep a lot of those, 12 to 16-inch bass as well and eat those out of those lakes.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I had no idea that, northern pike was I was just always under the assumption that there was, kind of a similar abundance, and, one thing I would ask you about, I was looking at northern pike here too, and it really seems to be kind of a similar scenario to what I was seeing earlier with the muskie is, there's a lot of moving baits, a lot of, kind of power type presentations. Is there ever really any scenarios for, I guess, are these pike and muskie, are you catching them in a lot of the same areas, or do they kind of, set themselves up a little bit differently? I've just seen, a lot of top waters, especially like ploppers or chopo type things, and then,
Mhm.
chatterbaits, big spinner baits, inline spinners too. But really, it seems like anything moving. Is there ever a time that you're
Anything
catching?
moving, yeah. If you want to catch small pike, an eater pike, throw anything flashy that moves fast, and you're gonna catch them, especially in certain lakes. I mean, there's lakes you can catch almost unlimited numbers of small pike, like 40, 50, 60 in a day, easy. Just throwing that kind of bait in shell in the weeds, around weeds. If you want to catch trophy pike in the summertime, they're deeper and they're much, much, much more picky about what they're eating. And I would say the majority of the big pike I've caught have either been on live bait, like big suckers or big minnows on a slip bobber, or they've been on some kind of jig and plastic, basically sharpshooting or slow rolling a jig and plastic over a deep weed line or a crib or something like that. Those bigger pike tend to be much more picky and not just chase down anything that moves like those smaller fish do.
Gotcha. That makes perfect sense. It's, that's really interesting.
And that's
So,
probably why they got big.
yeah, yeah, they've got to have a little bit of sense of caution and weariness to be able to grow to that size for sure.
Yes. But yeah, there's a lot of lakes that are completely overrun with small pike. I mean, they're a nuisance. There's so many of them. It's the complete opposite of muskies.
Yeah. So, kind of switching gears a little bit, Caleb, one of the things I want to talk about is I wanted to highlight our water clarity layer a little bit
Hmm.
because, just from kind of looking here, there seems to really kind of be a variance of, a lot of really cleaner, really clear lakes, and then, some that seem like they have a lot more color and stain to them. Around your area, do you see, is it, we could have just potentially had a big rain or something like that. But is there a lot of variance in the water clarity on some of these lakes around you here? And, if there is, does that impact your decision on, do I even go fish this lake that day? Or, do I target maybe a different species, one like largemouth and things like that tend to, be easier to catch in stained water, I know, than some others. But kind of how does water clarity play into affect your decision making on one, where to go, and then two, the techniques and species you're going to try to target?
Hmm. Well, absolutely it does. For instance, this spring I was fishing a really clear fishery and it was supposed to get windy that day and there was supposed to be some clouds and I was fishing walleyes, which are sunlight and water clarity sensitive. They are hard to catch in clear water, especially on calm days. And that's what it turned into. And I was struggling. I mean, I could see the walleyes literally with my eyes on these weed lines, but they would not bite anything. So I finally gave up banging up my head against the wall and moved to a dark stained lake that was nearby that had numbers of walleyes in it. And literally immediately on my first 5 casts, I hooked a walleye and they were on fire and I just crushed them. And this is only maybe 5 miles from the lake I was fishing that morning where they wouldn't touch a bait. So that makes a huge difference on certain days and especially for certain species. Um, if you're struggling on a clear lake, it's definitely worth a move, if you can and if you have an option close by to get something more stained. And then some days, certain tactics work much better on clear water. Like, for instance, uh, shaking a jig at suspended fish is trickier in a stained water lake because it doesn't create a lot of footprint in the water. It's not a huge vibration. You got to get really close to the fish for them to see it. But in some of these clear water lakes, they can see it for 20 feet, and they just come zipping over from, you can see them flying over to it from way farther than you think they could even see it from. So there's a lot of factors that come into play when it comes to stained water, but most of our lakes up here are pretty clear. But we do have some, especially some of the flowages systems that have that kind of tannic water flowing into them that get pretty dirty. And there's some of the shallower, weedier lakes that have algae blooms too in the summertime, but we have a lot of clear water up here in general.
Yeah, and I was just looking, here at Superior, we were talking about the wind guard, and I thought this was really cool that, you can see that the wind's blowing almost straight into, around Duluth here, and you can actually see this, stained water along this bank line here where this wind's just been blowing and beating on it.
Yep.
Is that something too, that you look for even
Oh,
on, you
absolutely.
guys, super clear lake, kind of like you said, if you get the wind, then you can, you know, potentially get some stain to that water. You can still catch those.
Yeah, and oftentimes on the Great Lakes, what we're looking for is a mud line where that dirty water meets the cold, clear water, and the fish will stack up on that lake structure. I mean, in the whole west end of Lake Superior, there's virtually no structure. It's just a giant flat, and anything different can really stack up fish. And that's one of the key things that we look for when we're trolling for trout and salmon out there is a break, a temperature break and a clarity break out there wherever we can find one, and then we'll set up and troll right along the edge of that oftentimes.
Yeah. You just from looking at the CMAP contours we have available, which through the app we have all of Navionics cartography available there. But just
Right.
looking at what's been submitted by other users, yeah, it looks like there really isn't a ton of contours and change around this. So do you see that with pretty much all species on Lake Superior that just finding even little subtle changes or differences in the contours can a lot of fish group up there. And do you see places where multiple different species are grouped up on the same spot? No, that's something we see a lot. Like
Mhm.
on the Tennessee River, for instance, if you've got a ledge or there's current blowing, there's every species of fish in the world could potentially be on that same ledge. So,
Oh,
is
yeah.
that some you
It
see a lot?
definitely happens on Lake Superior too. I mean, often it's almost hard to find spots where you aren't catching multiple species on Lake Superior because they're all trout and salmon, and they are all pretty much pelagic, meaning they're not relating to structure for the most part. They're typically relating to temperature, depth, and bait fish schools, whatever they're eating and chasing around. So wherever the food is and the right temperature is and the right depth, that's where they're going to be. And it oftentimes has almost nothing to do with the bottom at all when it comes to trout and salmon because they really don't. Now, lake trout will relate to structure. They will key on rock reefs and stuff like that. And that's typically where we vertical jig those fish. And there's different subspecies of lake trout that are more related to the bottom. Certain subspecies of lake trout are almost 100% rock and bottom related, and they very rarely suspend. But other subspecies are much more pelagic and open water fish. So it just depends on the subspecies of lake trout and kind of what their habits are. But for the most part, most of the fish we chase in Lake Superior are more open water type fish chasing bait schools, similar to your shad down south, those bass that are fishing, they're in open water. They're not really relating to structure necessarily. Um, Now you get in some of the bays on Lake Superior, and they fish much more like an inland lake where you're fishing pike and bass and walleyes on weed beds and structure and that type of thing, and it's really no different.
Yeah, and something you kind of mentioned salmon, and I guess in Lake Superior there's some steelhead as
Mhm.
well.
Yep.
If I'm not
Yep.
mistaken. I know coming into kind of September, October timeframe is when some of those species especially run. I know on the Lake Michigan side going east, like the Pierre Marquette River is one that a lot of those fish will run in. Is there anywhere kind of here off of Superior, or even on this side of Lake Michigan too, where you see, is that something that you're fishing for some in, September and
Mhm.
October? And kind of what are some of the rivers that, you'd recommend anglers looking for when, they start that migration? I know they can travel several miles, up
Oh,
those,
yeah.
but just, for instance,
Yeah, they
like
can
Green Bay, for
travel.
instance.
Yeah, so Green Bay has a few rivers that get fish in them. I I don't fish that Lake Michigan tributaries that much. I've got buddies that do all the time. I fish more of the Lake Superior tributaries for the most part. So I'm fishing like the Brule River and some of the North Shore rivers on Lake Superior. Um, there's there's a lot of options up there, especially if you get rain and a runoff in the fall. But, Lake Michigan has probably more options and bigger fish, when it comes to fishing those river run fish. And also there's a pretty good staging bite in front of most of those river mouths and in the harbors and stuff where those fish are not necessarily in the river yet, but you can target them trolling on the outside of the river mouths, both on Lake Superior and Lake Michigan as they start to stage to run up those rivers.
Yeah, no, it's always been one of the most fascinating kind of phenomenon, if you will, that happens up there is the way that those fish will, travel and things like that. And again, it's just, a testament to the, um, the just the wealth of water bodies and different species of fish that you guys have up that way to target. It's amazing.
Mhm. It's almost endless.
Absolutely. There was I wanted to pull up. This is something you and I had talked about before, with bottom hardness. I wanted
Mhm.
to find. See, there's a place in particular we can just kind of showcase this.
Yeah, while
Yes.
you're looking for that, I can kind of go over what I know about it. So
Yeah.
with the C maps in Omnia, that one of the options is bottom hardness. As you can see here, like on the Chippewa flowage, if that's mapped, one of the best things that you can do before you go to a lake is mark some bottom transitions, especially in deeper water. You can see what is hard bottom. It's more that hard orange or hard red, and a soft bottom is going to be that lighter yellow. And kind of the lighter it is, the softer, the darker it is, the harder the bottom. So if you can find one of those transition areas, especially in the basin where you've got like a little hard bottom reef running through, or you can check and see if a bottom rise on the map is actually hard bottom like rock and gravel, or if it's sand. It can also help you find weed beds. You look for that softer bottom shoreline versus the hard bottom shoreline. And it's one of those things you could never see before without actually going to the lake and mapping it yourself. But now with the C maps, you can see exactly what that bottom looks like before you even get there. And that's just a huge, huge bonus for pre scouting a lake. And I use it all the time when I'm looking at a new lake.
Yeah, and I think I know you've done a few really, really great videos talking about this bottom hardness specifically. So, if anyone wants to, learn more and dive into that a little bit deeper, check out some of the content that Caleb's created because it's really fascinating. And I think the fascinating and neat thing too is kind of what you mentioned is, this has really been the first time ever that you've actually been able to kind of look at an entire lake and actually see, these are the areas that have the harder bottom versus the softer bottom, your, clays, muds, things like that. And, just
Yeah.
looking at this particular area here, it's almost kind of like a little saddle that connects these, two pieces of land here, but you've got, really good hard bottom out through here, even coming into some of these contours before it drops off to a, lighter, softer bottom here kind of on both sides. So this whole area seems like it would be a really, really good one to target. And, you've
Yeah.
never,
In the
been able to
spring,
go
if
that.
you're looking for, smallmouth on rock, that's probably a great area. And if you look to that basin to the right, you'll see that there's almost a spine of hard bottom that runs directly across it, like a bunch of little dots there. Go down a little bit. Right there. See those little hard bottom dots going across that lighter basin?
Yeah.
That that could be some kind of a rock spine running across mud, and fish will travel that like a highway, and they'll use that hard bottom to kind of just use it as a road almost as it goes across that that softer bottom. So definitely one of those things you would never know about because it doesn't show much of rise in the bottom at all. Just you wouldn't see it, but now you know it's there and you can check it and see if the fish are on it.
Yeah, and I think, inversely is, you can go and target these areas that have a lot of hard bottom, and I think too, you can see areas that have a tremendous amount of soft bottom with a few hard places mixed in, and, I feel like that could be, something that I try to do a lot of times is just target those areas that nobody else is, really fishing. Maybe it's just a small area within a small hard bottom area within, a huge flat of, mud or clay or some kind of softer bottom that, the fish could really congregate in that area and could hold, a lot of fish on some of those key spots.
Mm-hmm. Yep, for sure. And the other thing I love about the C maps is even without the bottom hardness, the contours, you can count on them because a boat has actually mapped them. So these contours are 100% correct every time I've ever checked them. Every other mapping tool I've ever used has problems. Their data points are so far apart that they miss too much, and a lot of times it looks nothing like it shows on the map. But these maps are almost dead on accurate every single time I've ever checked them, and I've checked them against a lot of other maps and found stuff on these C maps that I would never see on anything else. 100% like not doesn't exist until you actually go there and check it and then find it there. Uh, and the only way I found some of these spots that I've caught a lot of fish on is by using these C maps to find little tiny structures that nobody else has mapped.
Yeah, exactly. And just, looking here at some of these on the contour side, which, for the audience that's not familiar with CMAP is it's, through Navionics. And this is actual data that has been sent in by, real users, just like, with our fishing reports and things like that. All this CMAP stuff is actually been, um, scanned by, same with the bottom hardness as well. So,
Yep.
exactly because there's been a boat that has went over every single bit of this and recorded all this information. So,
Mhm.
really is as accurate as you can get. And I think love to get your thoughts on this, Caleb. But just cartography in general. I feel like over time, we as anglers know how much lakes will change over the course of a decade, 15, 20 years. So, being able to have this more recent mapping too, I think that maybe has, a bigger effect on it than a lot of people realize is, these lakes are slowly changing, over time. And, having that more updated mapping and things that, not only one shows some things that the other one's never shown before, but, with it being, some newer data and information, there's things that could have changed. You have we know what, weather can do, from tornadoes to which you guys don't really have hurricanes up there, but, there's a variety of different weather patterns and things that can happen that can, change the complexion and the makeup of lakes. So it's really cool to be able to see all this information. And like you said, I feel like it's the most accurate, information that's out there by far. So,
Mhm. Yes, definitely.
um, one of the things too we'll touch on here just a little bit is the vegetation too, which is another one. Like I said, this is pretty widespread across, and I think that's something to mention too, Caleb. Is
Mhm.
I know up in Wisconsin especially, there is a tremendous amount of different types of grass. Down here in the South, we really see hydrilla. You see a little bit of coontail grass. Then once you get down into like Florida and some of those places, you start seeing some more stuff like reeds, Kissimmee grass, things like that. But what are really the predominant types of vegetation up there, and are there any specifically that you're looking for certain species?
Oh man, we have so much diversity when it comes to vegetation up here. I mean, there's green cabbage, there's red cabbage, there's coontail. We have a lot of milfoil up here now. That's kind of an invasive that's taken over a lot of areas. There is chara, which is like a deep water kind of real slimy type of grass that grows on the bottom in deeper water. In shallow, we've got bulrushes, we've got bigger lily pads, and then we've got what we call like silver dollar pads or smaller pads. We've got wild rice beds that hold fish at certain times of the year. We've got uh, just there's just so many different types of vegetation, but typically the vegetation that holds the most fish is going to be like your nice green cabbage that's scattered, not super thick, but scattered, and it's got holes in it, but it's nice and tall and green. That's typically the best weeds for just about any species of fish. Now you can't tell the species of weed, from these maps, but at least you can tell the general area where weeds have been mapped, so you have a place to start. The other thing you got to keep in mind with the vegetation maps is a lot of these places change from year to year, like pretty unbelievably. Like one year, a whole point will be covered in weeds so thick you can't fish them. The next year, they can be gone. So, you kind of have to take these maps with a little bit of grain of salt because they do change more than the bottom changes. So if it's a 2-year-old or 3-year-old map, it might not be dead on, but at least it's going to get you in the vicinity of an area that can grow good weeds on it.
Yeah. No, absolutely, and that's a really good thing to call out is, that grass can change, it even changes throughout the year, as far
Oh
as
yeah.
where it's growing and
Yeah.
things like that, so it's, definitely something to utilize as a reference point, and one of the things that I personally love to do too is actually kinda using a couple of these in conjunction, so, when you're looking at vegetation, I'm always looking to try to find those little anomalies within, that you look at an area like this that's, showing it's covered in grass. But if I actually flip over to the bottom hardness, I can see there's, a lot more harder bottom kind of in just this section here, which you can kind of see these two little,
Yep.
or three little humps that stick up there. But, you can lay it over with that vegetation again quickly and see that, hey, out of all this vegetation that's across through here, really the harder bottom stuff is just in this section right here. So, I
Yeah.
personally would
Great
probably
spot.
target that first,
Yep.
really kind of to break that down. So that's, one of the things I like to try to do with that, vegetation too, is use it in conjunction with, um, some of the, like the bottom part of this, especially to really kind of break down if you have a huge area like that that has a lot of grass.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's just confirmation. You see the holes in the grass, you can assume that that's probably hard bottom, but then you turn on the bottom hardness map and you can confirm that yes, indeed, it is a rock or gravel spot. And you can know all that before you ever get there, which is pretty valuable.
Um, Cool. Well, listen, Caleb, I know we've talked about a lot of different stuff here. Covered a lot of the map layers and features, here with Omnia Pro especially. But is there anything else that you wanna touch on, Caleb, or want to talk about before we go ahead? But sort of love to have another conversation here in a few months about some ice fishing. As well.
Yeah,
Maybe
that'll
dig
be
into a
fun.
little bit of that. We
Yeah, this stuff comes into play even more in ice fishing because you're so less mobile. So when you want to find the spot on the spot and you don't want to drill 500 holes, this mapping is super valuable because it'll put you there without having to drill a ton of holes and cover tons of water through the ice, which is a lot more difficult than just running your boat over and checking it. So, a lot of these features are even more valuable for ice anglers, I would say. So that'll be fun when we can start talking about ice fishing. So, but yeah, as far as just like I've tried a lot of mapping apps. I've tried just about all of them, honestly, and this is the one I keep going back to just because of all the data that you can gather from one app. You can find some of this data other places, but you have to pull some from here and pull some from there and then try and piece something together. Whereas with Omnia, it's just all there in one app. Just turn on whatever layer you want and you can contrast and compare kind of like you did with the hard bottom and weeds, and you don't have to jump around on 10 different, you know, tabs in your browser to try and piece something together. So in my opinion, having it all in one place alone is a huge bonus. And then you add on the fact that you can scout those lakes to have the trophy potential now, as well as look at those DNR surveys. Again, you can get that data if you want from the DNR, but that's a huge pain, and you have to research it all and you have to dig it up, and it's all just right there. So it's just the amount of data you can get on one app is unsurpassed in my opinion, and that's why it makes it that's why I keep going back to it, because I know I can find it all there. I don't have to look and waste a bunch of time.
Exactly, and that's what, we've always strived to do. We want to provide, all the information that an angler could want, whether it's someone like yourself from Wisconsin that's a multi-species angler, or that someone like myself, like a Kentuckian that's fishing some highland reservoirs and some the TVA, things like that. Um, it really is. We strive to have all the information that we possibly can on here. And, like I said, we'd love to hear in the comments, if there's anything, additionally that you guys would like to see, or, there's some of these lakes that you guys have fished before that we've touched on today. I know we touched on a few, Superior, some of the ones that are around Spooner. And before we go, I had one more question for you, Caleb. If, just looking
Mhm.
at all the conditions and things that we've looked at today, if you had to pick one species and one lake to go to this weekend, out of, everything that we've looked at here, where are you thinking you'd go?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Honestly, I can't necessarily name a specific lake, but looking at the weather, looks like we're gonna have some off and on, kind of rain showers and storms coming through. A little bit of wind this weekend, it looks like. I mean, it'd be a great weekend to target walleyes like in one of the shallower reservoirs or darker water fisheries up shallow, because I think with a little bit of cool down and some rain and some wind, those fish are going to push up shallow and start feeding in the edges of the weeds again. Um, so, even on those deeper reefs, the walleyes are going to bite in those conditions. So it'd be a good weekend to target walleyes, honestly. And I think some of those fish are going to start feeding a little bit shallower in those cloudier, windier conditions. So if your favorite lake, you got a good weed line bite, it's probably going to be a good time to get out there and fish that for probably multiple species. Just throw swim baits along those weed edges and have fun.
Absolutely. That sounds like a lot of fun. Um, Listen, again, Caleb, I really appreciate you coming on and talk through some of this stuff with us. And like I said, I look forward to having another conversation with you. We'll get into some more ice stuff, because it's something else too. I could learn a tremendous amount from you on that. But like I said, if you guys like what you watched here, like I said, subscribe to our Omnia channel, watch some more episodes of the Omnia Report. And like I said, Caleb will have your YouTube and everything listed below. So you want to go check out some more stuff that Caleb's done. Obviously, he's probably the most knowledgeable multi-species angler that I know, and he's got a lot of really good, cool content out there. So go and check him out too. And for all of us here at Omnia Fishing, we thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.